What matters with Donald Trump for his supporters is not his relationship to the truth. It's not his relationship to economic reality. It's not his relationship to whether he even has a basic knowledge of issues. What matters to them is faith in the great leader. Faith in the great leader. And at the end of the day, with his supporters, what will shake faith in the great leader is not his mental state or his physical state or the economic realities. It will be if they think the great leader has deceived him, which is why Jeffrey Epstein is more important than whether Donald Trump has all his marbles.
Hi, I'm Jo Crawford and welcome to Times Radio's Trump Report. Today I'm joined by Scott Lucas, Professor of US Politics at the University College Dublin's Clinton Institute and also founder and editor of EA WorldView. Thank you for joining me on the Trump Report today.
Thank you for having me here, Joe.
So we've heard that the Trump administration, they've released files on Martin Luther King Jr., including surveillance files from the FBI. Some are suggesting that this is potentially an attempt to distract from the Epstein file case as well. I mean, what do you make of this?
I'm not sure about the motive as to why it comes out now. I would say that if it's an attempt to distract from the Epstein files, it's not going to work. With respect to Martin Luther King, I think the American public right now, or at least a lot of them, are far more interested in that headline story about Epstein rather than the serious issues around King's life and his death. What I think there has been a sort of a general call by folks to just release files. That sort of taps into a lot of the conspiracy theories that have been circulating, including amongst Trump supporters, that could do with the death of John F. Kennedy, where there were summer files released earlier this year. Didn't really add much to what we know. Conspiracy theories around the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy in 1968. Again, given that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is in the White House, you could see the link there. So it sort of fits that interesting line, which is, whereas it was people, quote, on the left, or many of us on the left, who actually had wanted to know more about the assassination around King, because there were suspicions that James Earl Ray, the assassin, even if he was the lone shooter, was not acting on his own. Now you could see people who were embedded in conspiracy theory on the right who wanted the files out. Look, I'm going to push all that to the side. I think the key point is what the family said of Martin Luther King Jr. The family does believe that there were government folks who may have been involved in threatening King's life. That I don't think has been established, but the family also pointed out that what has been established, that King was the target of the FBI for years in terms of surveillance, in terms of disinformation, in terms of trying to tear down his reputation in an attempt to undermine the civil rights movement. And the family's asking that we respect that very clear history, that even as many of us celebrate King now, rightfully so, we don't forget that what he did was not only opposed by some who were in the government, but people like the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, went to a great lengths using racist invective, using their informants, using the threat of jail sentences to try to block King, as he made such a difference to so many lives.
And as his two living children, they've said that they're concerned about any attempts to misuse these documents in ways intended to undermine their father's legacy. I mean, if we look at the situation that's going on with the Epstein files as well, I mean, last week we had Trump, he was lambasting his supporters who were asking for the release of these files. He's now suing the Wall Street Journal.
10 billion with a
10
B.
billion, yeah, over the alleged drawing from the president to Epstein. I mean, how do you see this case moving forward? It's obviously caused a lot of upset amongst a lot of Trump supporters. Do you think it's settling down?
Let's evaluate where we are, because we're now a few weeks now into the uproar over whether or not we would see the files. And as you mentioned, a lot of that uproar comes from Trump supporters, which is what makes the case so significant. Trump's playing for time. He's playing for time on two fronts. The first, as you mentioned, is this shoot the messenger tactic. So why does Trump sue the Wall Street Journal for $10 billion? Because he tries to take attention away from the Epstein files story itself, the substance of it, and say it's the fake news media. But the second area, which I think is more interesting, where he's playing for time, which hasn't really been appreciated by the press, is this idea that he ordered the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, to release the files 5 months after she said they were on her desk. He didn't actually order quite that. What he told Bondi to do was seek the release of the grand jury transcripts in Epstein's case. But as legal experts have pointed out, first of all, you have to have judges that sign off on that. So that takes time. Secondly, that's only a fraction of the Epstein material. People who have talked about the New York courts have said, look, quite often what is presented to the grand jury is only a small amount of what prosecutors have. Because, of course, with a grand jury, all you're trying to do is get an indictment at that point. So, it was an attempt to sort of satiate the critics. Again, in a couple of ways. One is, oh, yeah, we'll get you the file sometime, after denying they existed. Secondly, by saying, MAGA, rally, it's the evil media. But I don't think anybody's going to wipe away this one statement. When Trump called his own supporters weaklings, and the fundamental here is he whipped up the conspiracy theory for years. He built upon the conspiracy theories, the hoax around Pizzagate, the idea that Democrats were into pedophilia. He made political capital of it. And when it came to put up or shut up, he didn't put up. And he's not shutting up. So, whether he'll be forgiven for this, as for so many things by his supporters, we'll see. But I think this one rumbles on for a while.
Obviously, Donald Trump, he's denied any wrongdoing in relation to Epstein. But when we had the Wall Street Journal, when they released that article about the picture, we did see a few prominent conspiracy theorists, MAGA influencer figures who did come out in support of Trump, saying that they didn't think that this was Trump. They didn't think that was right. We also heard from Musk, who on the one hand had been making all those X posts allegedly claiming that Trump had deeper ties to Epstein than it's been made out. But we had Musk saying about this drawing that it really doesn't sound like something that Trump would say. And I think it's interesting there. Do you think that we are seeing sort of a turning of the tide with his sort of like main group of influential supporters?
I think he bought himself some time. Now, let's talk a little bit about, first of all, he got Steve Bannon, who wants to be relevant again, because Bannon's on the outs with the Trump folks. And Bannon's like, yeah, brilliant. This is what the president needed to do. Yeah, go kill the media. And that's Bannon's tactic. Let's remind ourselves, Bannon doesn't believe in truth. Bannon believes in you flood the zone with excrement. And that's how you win. Secondly, it's Laura Loomer, who, God knows, has become one of the most influential people in America, even though I'm going to be careful about the adjectives that are used here. Let's put it this way. Laura Loomer exists for two reasons, and I'll stay on the right side of libel over this is. The first is to get attention to Laura Loomer. The second is, with no elected office, with no official role, to get into Trump's ear. And she will say anything or do anything and pursue any vendetta to do so. So yeah, Laura Loomer, of course, who's been, she had been the one calling for a special prosecutor to review the files. Trump doesn't give her that, but what Trump gives her is another target, the Wall Street Journal. And there you go. Laura's satisfied because she can just rail on about all those enemies that are inside her head. And then, you talk about Elon. Well, look, Elon's sitting here scrambling in that he has been ostracized by the Trump camp. His ploy for an America party, remember that one? Doesn't look like he's going to follow through on that. So now Elon's like, oh, okay, I'm still here. I'm still playing politics. What does he do? Yeah, he goes after the media again. And that's what I mean by buying time. But unless you completely shut down the Epstein case, unless you completely shut down the conspiracy theory, Musk and Loomer and all those folks and Bannon can say, oh, yeah, let's target the media. People will want answers. That's the whole basis of conspiracy theories. And when you can't give them the answers, they get ticked off.
How influential would you say these sort of conspiratorial figures are for both in terms of, how Trump views them, but actually their impact on influencing people themselves?
Well, they're massive. We're no longer in the world. I would love it if you and me on Times Radio and Times newspaper and other great publications were the ones that got the information out and got the discussion going. But that's not the way, we've been through this. We know this is how it works in the 21st century, that whichever so-called influencer shouts the loudest, truth, fiction doesn't matter. It's getting the attention. And you take this back, if we stick with the Epstein story, take this back to 2016. There were issues didn't matter in that 2016 presidential campaign. At least it didn't matter for the media because they didn't cover them. And I'm talking about healthcare, I'm talking about gun control, I'm talking about education, I'm talking about foreign policy, whether we're talking about Russia and Ukraine or the Islamic State. Even the economy really didn't get a look in 2016. It was all these crazy statements that this guy Trump was making and these influencers around him. And this is where Pizzagate becomes important. And for those who don't remember, Pizzagate was this absolutely unfounded theory, comes out of the QAnon movement, which is there's a cabal that runs government, and they run government, and in their spare time, they go down to a pizzeria in Washington, D.C. in the basement, and they plan all their attacks on underage kids. And this was such a serious, narrative, false narrative, that someone went in and actually shot up that pizzeria. More importantly, there were people who voted on the basis of this. Let's get the establishment out of office. Trump will go in and he'll drain the swamp. When in fact, we know Trump is part of the elite swamp. Another story for another time. And that was just the start of it. I mean, that conspiracy theory got traction, even before the speed of the internet that we're used to now, before the TikTok, before Insta, before the acceleration and the degradation of what happens on X. All of that being said, Joe, though, I'll put a fundamental point. While it is important, these influencers and these conspiracy theories, it's important not to lose track of the fundamentals that are also important. What won the election in the end was how people felt about the economy, how they felt about the Democrats in the office, and Hillary Clinton running a lousy campaign. Why do I say all that? For all the attention we rightfully give Epstein, the effect it might have on some of Trump's followers, he is dipping in the opinion polls sharply in the last couple of weeks, primarily because of the economy, because of the bungled tariff threats, and because people don't necessarily like what he's doing with immigration. And so while we pay attention to the conspiracy theories and what happens, don't lose sight of that. I think economy and immigration will still be the fundamentals that determine Trump's political future.
And I want to turn to an equally as important subject, which is Trump's swollen ankles. They've made a lot of headlines. The White House has confirmed that Trump has been diagnosed with chronic venous insufficiency. This is considered to be common amongst older people. It causes blood to pool in the veins. It's interesting to compare when we looked at when Biden was in power. There was a lot of speculation there about his health, his mental health. We know that he has since been diagnosed with prostate cancer. But why do you think that the Trump administration decided to announce that Trump had been diagnosed with this condition?
Well, speaking as a person of a certain age, I'm checking my feet out at this point. And then what triggered the story was there were certain photographs that came out, not of Trump's cankles, but of his hands, because another symptom of venous insufficiency is that you get blotching on the hands. And the White House initially tried to stonewall the questions as to what was causing it. And then there were further pictures that came out that he was using makeup on the hands. And they finally came out and said, all right, this is the diagnosis. And it explains the blotching on the hands. And then there's the discussion of the swollen feet. Assuming that the White House is being straight up about the story, many people have venous insufficiency. It's not a life-threatening or even that serious a condition unless it is connected to other conditions, deep vein thrombosis, for example, or if you've got arterial damage. And at this point, the White House is saying, he's been checked out. He's not suffering from that. That being said, I think the point you make here on media coverage is an important story. And that is that, Trump's 79 years old. And he, again, wasn't the main reason why he won the election in 2024. But one of the ways that, the contributing factors was the ability for the Trump people to get the media just to talk Biden, 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 and not talk about Trump's own conditions.
As journalists, we have a responsibility to not sort of diagnose someone from what we can just see from the outside. But I mean, if we turn to sort of the American public's perception is of a president, and how influential do you think their health and well-being is in playing into that? Because, you know, as I mentioned before with Biden, you know, you could say that that was probably one of his downfalls, was the fact that there was so much speculation there.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. And why did Biden and Trump get treated differently? And I've always said it has to do with spectacle. It's always been a big thing for me, is spectacle. And that is that, you know, American politics, you and I can talk about the reality, whether it's physical health, mental health, the economy, housing, education, but people want the spectacle. They want the show. Now, the Biden people could not create a show out of Biden's condition. Every time you saw Biden, you know, looking physically infirm or mentally slipping up, that was the spectacle they didn't want, right? What Trump's been so successful at, because even if there are questions about his basic retention of information, even if there are questions about his relationship with the truth, he's a snake oil salesman. He is a ringmaster of the circus, and he could make his own condition and those doubts into a spectacle to his advantage. Because I remember the infamous tweet several years ago where he just wrote Covfefe, Covfefe. No one knows to this day why he wrote Covfefe. Now, the media were like, oh, he wrote Covfefe. What was all about? At the end of the day, no one went back and said, you know what, this may be a guy who really wasn't on planet Earth when he wrote that. Okay? And I know when he is referred to, you know, countries by random names that aren't true, especially African countries, and the media just go, oh, look at there. He just created a country called Nambia, right? And whether he was trying to refer to Namibia or whatever, they just refer to that, right? And they will come up, and sometimes they'll do interviews with him, and they'll put up the transcripts of the interviews, and it'll just be rambling nonsense. And rather to getting into the heart of the nonsense, they'll go, oh, there's that Trump again, you know, sort of like dealing with your crazy uncle, but your crazy uncle's in the White House. What matters with Donald Trump for his supporters is not his relationship to the truth. It's not his relationship to economic reality. It's not his relationship to whether he even has a basic knowledge of issues. What matters to them is faith in the great leader. Faith in the great leader. And at the end of the day, with his supporters, what will shake faith in the great leader is not his mental state or his physical state or the economic realities. It will be if they think the great leader has deceived him, which is why Jeffrey Epstein is more important than whether Donald Trump has all his marbles.
Scott Lucas, thank you for joining me on the Trump Report today.
Thank you so much, Joe.